So welcome everybody to our 226th Reading Online Sports Economics Seminar. This week we have Jess Hargreaves from the University of York presenting ClusterAFC, Clustering Career Trajectories of Elite Association Football Players. I should say as we start, we are as always generously hosted by the University of Reading and sponsored by the Sports Economics Review. You will have probably got your reminder with a set of dates, of which some of them are abstract submission deadlines for conferences, which are getting closer. It's 15 days from the abstract submission deadline for the North American Association of Sports Economists sessions at the Southern Economic Association Conference in Houston, Texas in November. Frank Stevenson, email him by the 28th of March if you want to submit to that conference. There's a submission deadline for the Athens University of Economics and Business Sports Analytics Workshop on the 21st of May, so even sooner, next week. And then on the 31st of May is the deadline for the European Sports Economics Association Annual Conference. So do look out for those, alongside April 1st, the deadline for the Gijón Sports Economics Conference. Jess, I didn't even ask you before, but are you happy to take questions as you go along, or would you rather have questions at the end?
Yeah, questions as we go probably is best because, well, I think as will become apparent, it's going to be like a whistle-stop tour of lots of things. So do stop me if I've gone too fast.
Okay, and if you can't see the notifications come in, let me know, because then I can interrupt you or people can interrupt you.
You know, you're in on this as well, so do feel free to chip in yourself as well. It's collaboration.
No, it's absolutely your talk, but all yours, Jess. Please do take it away.
Right, I don't know how to do Teams, so give me a moment.
Just don't hit the leave button when you try and share your screen.
Share. Okay, we'll try that.
Looks good.
Right, okay, shall I get going?
Yep.
Cool, right, so yeah, as we were just saying, and yeah, as has been said a little bit earlier, so this is ClusterAFC. It's about clustering, a cluster analysis of football careers. That's where that acronym comes from. Very much a joint work with three people. So Rich Bingham,
how are you doing?
Oh, is at the University of York with me, and James, who we all know, at the University of Reading. So I'm the one who's speaking out loud today. So it's going to really be, it's one of those cases where the narrator is really influencing the version of the story you're being told. And I'm very aware of that. So I'm a mathematician in the Department of Mathematics. So I've tried to, we're at Roses, I've tried to get some economics in. I've, yeah, directly stolen things from James's slides. So yeah, it's really going to be from my perspective, but I'll do my best to make it economics. Right. So, like I say, this is, I'm telling you sort of my version of events. So this all started when I was at Roses on the 29th of November in 2024, watching James present this LO-based player ratings and how good are LO ratings talk, which was brilliant. And this is one of the pictures that I've screen grabbed out of literally off the YouTube video. And it was this picture that really interested me, where we're plotting these, you know, player ratings over time for these different players. And it reminded me of some stuff that I've done in the past or seen in the past that was about like, could you cluster these things? Are there similar career trajectories? Because if you look at that plot from the November Roses, you can see you've got Harry Kane, Van Dijk, Jordan Henderson. They do seem, maybe James Milner, they do seem to have a quite similar shape. And then James Norwood, who we were just talking about earlier, an Oldham player, and Dean Lewington. I need to ask you, James, why you chose to put Dean in here in this point of this talk, because when you see the analysis later, Dean's a character in this as well. So I thought that was fascinating.
basically because he was had a very long career.
Yeah. But yeah, so they've got a different shape, a different pattern, and I just wondered if there was any way you could kind of see if you could, categorize these things, find groups in the data, because as we'll see a bit later on, the perspective that sort of that talk was coming from was about kind of player recruitment, maybe a snapshot in time, how good is a player, but also if you're recruiting, you sort of want to know the future career trajectory, and information about that could be useful. So I got in touch with James and said, I'd be really interested. Would you mind giving me those ELO ratings and just use them as an input for these sorts of questions? And I was just going to sort of do it in that way, that it's kind of think of stuff that could be completely separate to the rating system that's going into it, that just takes a rating system and does some kind of cluster analysis. But James isn't like that. It very much has turned into a collaboration, and I think it's a good sign of the methods that we're going to talk about today that actually show that some of the things they pick up has actually helped with the tweaking of these systems. So it is kind of doing two things at once. It's kind of should be a bit independent of the input player rating that you put into it, but also at the same time it can kind of validate how good your player rating system is in some ways. Okay, so that was a bit of a history lesson. Let's do a bit more of a formal introduction then to the talk. So the idea is this: we want to identify an athlete's long-term potential. That's a really important challenge in talent identification if I'm a football club. So what would be really useful, as we sort of move towards data-driven decision making, is if you had a sort of objective method that could assess and compare different players' career trajectories. So yeah, we're going to talk today about ClusterAFC, so cluster analysis of football careers, a way of doing that. And today we'll talk about two approaches for finding those types of careers, and see what they come up with and kind of compare and contrast those results. And the idea behind all of this is that this is really a very much a work in progress. So I'm going to throw lots of things at you today, and I'm really interested. Do stop me. I'm really interested to hear what people have to say. So yeah, like we say, very much a first, maybe even a zero step towards providing this kind of data-driven perspective. And the key thing you'll see later on is that it's freely available data sources. I mean, you've got to be a genius like James and Rich Bingham to work with them, but they're free. So if you've got that, you're all right. So to consolidate that then into kind of three key aims, like I say, the idea is that we're going to have an approach to categorize career paths of players. Something that makes this work different to a lot of the other work that you tend to see is that we're not doing the big 5 leagues here. Like we say, I'm wearing a Leeds shirt. We had an Oldham crest on the first slide. We're really thinking about recruiting to maybe not somebody in the top big 5 leagues, other football clubs, what they might do. Hence why we said it's freely available data that we're trying to use. So that's aim number 1. We want to have this method to be able to categorize career paths. Then we'll propose a use case. We'll, like we say, interpreting the results that we find. And then, as I said earlier, this kind of bonus aim 3, is that actually these methods can be used to kind of see how good your player ratings model is that you've used as an input. So they're the aims. How are we going to go about doing that? So we'll start off with a bit of background and motivation, including, like I say, a real whistle-stop tour of ELO ratings and how you might turn that into a player rating. And then we'll talk about this cluster idea today. So once you've got that player rating, how could you then start identifying types of careers? Okay, so we'll move into the background and motivation. I always like to have on these like an image or a quote or something. So I won't read out loud. I'll just leave it up there, maybe pick out the important part. So this is from a Sports Illustrated article. Matthew Benham saying the table is notoriously inaccurate. There's way more. So the league lies. The league table does lie, apparently. Okay. So what are we doing then? Professional football clubs, or why are we doing it? Professional football clubs want to recruit, and But also there's a version of this where if you want to be a professional footballer, you're looking for employment as well. And we'll sort of touch on how you could view the same problem through those two different lenses. Obviously, clubs in all the divisions are recruiting from lots of places. So within your division, or from a higher or a lower division, or a global market, or just the UK. And there's lots of transfers that go on every single year. So if I'm going to recruit a player, crucial to that then is that I need to have some kind of idea of how good I think that player is, what they're going to bring to my team. And, you know, these days that's going to be a data-driven decision, and there's increasingly vast amounts of that data available. But smaller football clubs, or like we say, if we're thinking about it from the other side of the coin, the young footballer, aren't going to have access to a stats bomb account, perhaps. So the question is, could basic data that's freely available still be useful and still do a good job? So again, to motivate it, we're going to, at the moment, just kind of think about two perspectives you could think about these things. So like we say, Matthew Benham's our hero. So involved in Brentford and involved in, I can never say the name of this team, Midtjylland, maybe. But again, this is another article that I really like. It's really just saying about the Moneyball idea, that you can't, these sorts of teams can't outspend the competitors, so you've got to outthink them. And thinking that if you kind of analyze data in a different way, or a sophisticated way, that could give you an edge. And it's saying that, you know, in this is an article from about 10 years ago, and it's saying that, you know, it's kind of newsworthy that players are being signed because algorithms have helped identify them as undervalued prospects. And we'll see a little bit later on from this article, they give an insight into that algorithm that's identified a prospect. But like I said, there's another way that you could think about this, and that is as a footballer. So a company that I've kind of been talking to through this kind of work is called, and again, I think it's Just Ball, but my Yorkshire accent kind of butchers that name. So Just Ball. And what they're trying to do is help guide players through their careers, help them transition into first team football and help them reach their potential. So they're really trying to look at that process of reaching the highest level, and they're really interested in how decisions that a player might make early on in their career, if that helps, or if you could be setting yourself up for, you know, to fail. So they've got lots of questions about how, like, is it better to go and sit on the bench for a top team, or is it better to play every week, you know, out on loan for League Two? These sorts of questions that a player maybe has to consider when they're thinking of their career. So could we help them with that? So like we say, back to Midtjylland then. So this idea of how they might have identified a prospect using an algorithm. So the example that we've got from this article is Tim Sparv, who they signed from, again, another club that I can't pronounce, from Germany's second tier. And the rationale is that the model says that last season that team were good enough to play in the English Premier League. The idea is that the model's ranking all the clubs in Europe as if they're in one league. And then this second tier German side were higher up than you might think, being a second year German side. So that makes them think, right, that team seems to be doing pretty well in our model. Let's drill into that and see, well, it must be who are the players that are responsible for that. And then so what they said here, and like I say, this is a long time ago. And from what I know of the football industry, the fact that they were saying this in an article means that they probably did this even years before that, and they're doing something much more sophisticated. But they were saying, once you've identified this team, they looked at the players who had the most appearances, and Tim Sparv was the person that they decided for to go for. But that model, this idea of thinking, right, if I can recruit from anywhere in Europe, I need some way of comparing people who play in the different leagues. So I want like one league table. And then if I have a model with that, I can perhaps identify teams that are doing perhaps better than maybe the rest of the world thinks, and then try and start working out which players are responsible for that success. And again, this is a bit of a detour, but we'll come back to it later. So also in that article, there's this quote about them saying that people see a huge difference between the Premier League and the lower divisions in England. And they're saying that actually that's not quite true. There is a big gap between sort of the top people in the Premier, the top teams in the Premier League, and then the sort of bottom half of the table. But once you've got over that huge gap, like the gap between bottom half Premier League teams and Championship or even League One is a far smaller difference. So as I say, I'm just throwing that quote out there because it'll be a bit interesting later on. Yeah, let's move on. So hopefully we've kind of justified why you might want to start doing these things that, you know, as a football team or as a football player. So we just want some simple systems to rate players then. We want them to be free to construct because that young footballer is unlikely to have a StatsBomb account. And like we say, we want to be applying it to basic in-match information. So the idea is similar to that model that we saw for Meacherland, is that you want to start with a team-based measure. Okay, so you can identify teams that you think are doing well. And then once you're in that, try and give that success, share that out amongst the players that are playing in that team. And like I said at the start of this, if you want to see a real deep dive into the method that we're going to use today for a player ranking, then it'll be rewatch, because of course you saw it live or you caught up on YouTube if you missed it. But yeah, rewatch that Roses where James talks you through the player LO ratings. But we'll do it, like I say, we'll do a really quick version today. But the difference between this Roses talk and that Roses talk is that this is saying, if you've got that player rating system, it kind of would be a snapshot in time. So if I'm, you know, Oldham and I'm looking to sign a player right now, and I've got the player ratings from that Roses in November 24, then I can rate players and say, oh yeah, this is a good player, we'll take them. But like we said, actually, there's something more informative about kind of where they are in the career, what we might expect them in the future. So if we could go even further than just a snapshot in time and thinking about the whole career to try and get a fuller picture of the player. Now, this concept then of clustering career paths, sadly, was not my own. Actually, somebody, I had it, I think, and then somebody published this paper, which is a great paper. It's from the Journal of Quantitative Analysis in Sport, great journal. And so they did career path clustering of elite soccer players among European Big Five nations, utilising dynamic time warping, which I'd never heard of until I read this paper. But so how is what we're going to talk about today different to this then? Well, the first one is, like we said before, once again, they're in the European Big Five nation leagues. So we're different because we're looking at UK lower leagues. There's some slight differences. But the point is, they were, like I said, from what I can gather, the first paper to think about clustering football careers characterised by a career path as viewing it as a time series. What's different about what they did is they're looking at that time series being a yearly performance quality. So they're just getting one observation per year for a player. But there's a problem because people have different career lengths. So all the methods that you might use to do this kind of clustering, you'd need the time series to be the same length. So the way that they get around that problem is utilising this dynamic time warping, which sounds incredible. But then when you do that, you can kind of map careers onto the same kind of time span so that you can compare them. And you can see a figure there from their paper on the right, where they identified 13 different clusters of career paths, ranging from like higher player quality scores to lower. But actually, it's not just kind of like, maybe if you look at 0 and 1, the 0, I think, are like the elite players, superstars, think Messi and so on are in that one. And then 1 and 2, they sort of look like the same shape, but just underneath. Whereas you do get sort of crossovers as you go down. So it's not just kind of, oh, everyone's got the same career trajectory, you're just a bit worse. There is this kind of, maybe when you're peaking, or maybe the start looks a bit different. So, you know, it is a great paper, does say that it's useful to kind of look at these career paths and you can gain some insight. But one of the things that they identify, you know, in the final paragraph as future work is that yearly performance quality measure that they use. So what they do is they do something like, this is my quick explanation of it, and I'm probably doing them a massive disservice. Something like they take UEFA kind of team coefficients for a year, for the season, for a team. And then they divide that they share that out by how many minutes each player played for that team. And the example that they give in their paper is they say, if you've got, say, a goalkeeper, 2 goalkeepers for this team, and they played 50% of the time each, they'd have the same value of this metric for that year. But if one goalkeeper happened to play in games that they won every single one, and the other goalkeeper played in the games where they lost every single one, that wouldn't sort of be fair, right? That they'd both get the same, in using their input, they'd get the same performance measure, when actually it seems like one person was a bit weaker. So that's something that we've taken them up on. They said that was their area of future work, so we've had a go at seeing if we could do anything about that. Right, so I've spoken enough about what other people have done and why we might want to do it, so let's talk a little bit about what we actually did then. So, like we've said before, our input is we need a player rating system as an input. The two that spring to mind for me would be an LO rating or a plus-minus rating. So and these are the sort of key references in for those two types of rating systems. The one in bold is because the figure from the right is taken from that paper, and again we're seeing these time series for superstar players where they're showing us their kind of plus-minus ratings, slightly different versions of their system that they produced. So we could use that as an input, but we're going to go with LO ratings today, and a little bit later on we'll like I say, we'll do a quick recap of what they are. So to summarize what we're going to do today, the idea is we want to group players with similar career paths. We're going to do that by representing a career as a time series of some performance rating, in our case, player LO ratings. But there's a problem, because if you look at that plot on the left, people have careers of different lengths. So how can we deal with that? So like we say, in that paper that we saw before, they decided to do this dynamic time warping. So that's one approach, but our approach is just going to do some feature engineering. So we're going to just produce some metrics that describe these time series. And then that's going to give us a nice, beautiful data set in an Excel spreadsheet that we can then use all our machine learning techniques that we want to use on. So life is good. So that's the way that we get around the problem, trying to engineer these features. Again, we'll talk a little bit later on about the exact things that we engineered, but I'm just putting it there. Then once we've got them, like I say, we can use all the stuff that we know and love. So the first thing that we'll do with those metrics that we've derived from the time series is a principal components analysis. I asked James if I can just say that and not say too much about like what a principal components analysis is, but please somebody do shout if I need to explain anything, if anything's unclear. But the idea of principal components analysis is you take a data set, you can use linear combinations of your metrics to produce like new metrics. But the idea is it's like a zip file. So you're compressing it so you can kind of get as much of the information in the data set as possible, but actually using fewer metrics. So that's nice. And it also means as well, you can do nice visualization with it. And another bonus is that those new things that you get, your principal component scores, are uncorrelated. And in this area, you might imagine that a lot of if we're thinking of trying to describe these time series, we might have a few different ways of describing it, and there might be some relationship between them, and which might cause issues in some of the things that we use. So principal components analysis can kind of take care of that for us as well. So we've got step one, get these new these metrics to describe a time series so that we've got the same observations for every single player, same number of observations. Then we can do a principal components analysis of it, and then we can feed that into a cluster analysis because we want to find the groups in the data. So, like I said to you, I'm just getting, brilliant, a question.
Hi, Jess. So, really interesting. So there's one question that I'm struggling a little bit to understand, this idea of making the time series of similar lengths. I'm not sure if that is sort of correct, but that seems, I'm struggling a little bit with that, because say that you have two players, they look very similar, they have, you know, very similar careers, and then around age, I don't know, 28, 29, one of them has an injury and never really comes back to the same level, and, you know, retires at age 32, while the other player keeps on going at, you know, whatever his evolution is going to be. And the fact that, and it doesn't have to be an injury, but, you know, it could be that, you know, some players have an earlier decline than the others. And so you have one player whose career goes up to age, you know, 37, 38, and the other one who, you know, retires at 32. And, you know, why should we make those two time series equal length? Those are two separate, you know, they're two different things, right? And
Yep.
we don't want to make them, you know, similar lengths.
That's right. I completely agree with you. So that is what you've just described. That, as far as I understand, that's what this dynamic time warping does. So does force them to have this career. So like you say, your player who's going on till age 42 is being squashed onto this plot so that you can see it. That's not what we're going to do. So if you stick with me, I'll show you how we try and capture what you've just described. Because we completely agree with what you're saying, that you want to try and get that is different. And hopefully you'll see that we do a bit later on. But yeah, that's the perfect question. I couldn't have paid you to ask a better one, so thank you.
All right. Next time I'm going to ask to be paid.
So yeah, like I say, completely agree with you. That is what they did, but that's not what we're going to do. We're going to try and look at as you've just done, you explained kind of two different careers. And so we're going to try and kind of capture that by, some metrics that we'll derive. So, okie dokie. Right. So, like I say, we'll come to that later on then, but let's imagine that we've got a way of treating all the time series the same in some way. So then we can use a cluster analysis. So the kind of one of the most famous types of cluster analysis. So a cluster analysis is just trying to find groups in the data. So k-means, what that does, the title helps. So the k means you've got to select how many groups you want. So in this plot on the right, I might have looked at that data and gone, I think there's 3 groups in this data set. So perfect. That means I can input the number 3. And what k-means does is it tries to kind of find the dense regions and then find the center of them. So there's the algorithm on the left there. As I say, I'll do a really quick version of this, but this is like normally what I'm teaching my students in like a week of lectures. But here we go. Let's try and do it in 2 minutes. So what happens is in this one on the right, say I wanted 3 clusters. What it does is randomly generate 3 cluster centers. Look at all the points, work out which one they're nearest to, and put them in that cluster. Then it finds the middle of that cluster and does the same thing again. So and then says, once I've moved this centroid to the middle of this cluster, this group of points, does anybody move? Has anybody now become closer to this center? And it keeps on going until nobody moves, and you end up with a picture like that on the right, where you've kind of got 3 groups there. Your stars show you where the center of the cluster is, and then the way that it's being a triangle or a square is that it's nearest, whichever star it's nearest to, it's getting that badge. So that's k-means cluster analysis. Like I say, probably the most famous perhaps of the cluster analysis that you could do. Then here's one that I'd never heard of, archetype analysis, which is similar but opposite to k-means. And I was telling James about this the other day. I saw it at the Math Sport International conference. Someone was talking about this. And they said in that talk, they were like, no one's heard of it, but it's really good. So they were sort of doing a bit of advertising for archetype analysis. And it worked because I was really intrigued by it. So what they were trying to do was cluster tennis players. And they were working with tennis coaches. And basically what they were saying is if you do k-means analysis and you say to them, right, I've got 3 types of tennis players, and you represent those types by Joe average in the middle, the coaches were a bit like, I don't really know how your cluster 1 is different to your cluster 2. Like those 2 players aren't massively different in my mind. And they're not superstar people that I even recognise, because they're just Joe Average in the middle. And in sport, actually, we hear about the extreme people. So that's what archetype analysis is. It's instead of trying to describe or cluster based on thing in the middle, it's looking for extreme points. And as I say, I am not an expert in this. I've seen one math sport talk on it and then, read a few tutorials online to try and implement it myself. But we can see from this picture what it's trying to do. So here, again, we're going to go for 3 clusters in this picture. And here are archetypes. Like we can see, they're sort of associated with clusters, you might think, but they're really on the edge of it and they're far away. So like that green cross on the left is as far away as possible from the other, within that cluster, it's furthest away as possible from the other data points. So that's what it's trying to do. And hopefully the idea would be that that person over there might be a person you've heard of and might fully represent what it is about this group that's, making it different from the other one. And there's some really cool visualizations you can do. And I'm really sorry I haven't, like I say, because I'm no expert, I haven't been able to do them today for you, but you can do some really cool stuff where you can say like what blend of the archetypes is a particular point, and it's really cool. But anyway, like I say, we're just going to have a quick look at this and see if it makes anything a bit more easy to understand. Okay, so hopefully we've got kind of the machine learning toolkit that we need kind of sorted. So all we need now is that input, those player ratings. So this is my attempt to, like I say, condense a full roses from previously into about 3 minutes so that we can kind of look at it from a different perspective. So LO ratings then, if you've never heard of them, it's an estimation of a team's strength based on past results. You can use it for prediction, and they're sort of super famous, and there's websites where you can get these for LO ratings for club football. And I've picked this one because I think they've got the best logo that you can think of for a football club LO rating website. And if you've watched James's talk, you will know why that's a great logo for a football club LO ratings. So what are they doing then to calculate those LO ratings that we saw on that website? Well, you start with, you get one value for a club at each point in time, and the higher the better. Now, it's always a bit counterintuitive, these LO ratings. You start with the actual rating, but then I'm not giving you the equation to calculate that yet, because you'll see why in a moment. Once you've got those ratings, the difference between them is directly linked to the probability that a team would win in a match between those two teams. So you can see the LO difference is in purple there on the bottom, the difference between those R's. So you look at those differences and you get a probability that a particular team's going to win. So that's going to be between 0 and 1. Okay, why have I started with that? Because then they play each other and you can update the rating based on what happened. So if we look at this, I've just copied over that equation from the previous slide at the top there. The second equation that you can see is saying that the change in your rating, so the difference between my new rating and my old one, is going to be some number that I can work with, multiplied by the difference between the result and what we expected to happen. So if we expected you to win and you did win, it's not going to change that rating very much, because it feels like, yeah, we had that right then because we predicted it correctly, and so on. So they're LO ratings for teams. And like I say, these are just taken off their website with the great logo. Once again, they focus on top leagues, so that's why Leeds United have this point in time here when I was at uni and we were in League One. But it comes back to what we saw that quote before about how like the differences between the top 7 teams in the Premier League and the rest of the Premier League is big, and then when you're down, the differences aren't, because in the early 2000s, Leeds were in the Champions League. We were up at the top there. Then we had this real sharp decline that you can see, and you do see a sort of massive difference between us. And I picked out the other 4 that basically in the Premier League era win it all the time. But now look at us, we're coming back. And look at Man U and so on and so forth. So there are your team ratings that we know and love. So the idea would be, how could we turn that into a player rating? And so the idea that we've got is that we could distribute that change. So a match has happened. We're going to update that team LO rating by a certain amount. Well, we could share that out between the people who played, proportional to the amount of minutes they played in the game and also what happened in those minutes they were playing. So I would argue at this point, this is where we're directly answering that call from that other paper where it said, look, our rating system that we had, if you had those two players that had played 50% of the games and you won all of these and they lost all of those, they'd get the same rating. Well, you wouldn't here, because it would see that one person had lots of goals scored against them and no clean sheet bonuses and so on and so forth. So hopefully we've done exactly what they were sort of asking us to do in that paper. So as I say, watch the Roses talk if you want to know the granular detail, but hopefully the concept makes sense. You're going to change, you've got a change that you're going to give for this team. We'll share it out with the people that played and we'll take into account what happened when they did play. Okay, so then hopefully now I'm going to come and answer the question, right? It's about how we're going to turn those time series into something that we can work with. So the data that we've got then is match level data from 1998 to, and I've put a little star there, the 1st of May 2023. That moment in history that we all know where we were. Yeah, why is it that? It's because there seems to be a little bug in the code that's making things go a bit wappy for us after that point in time. So we're just going to look at from then till 2023. But actually, I think that's good because it gives us the benefit of hindsight, right? If we were doing it for right now, we wouldn't know what happened to people, but we do know what happened to people. So I'm going to argue that, that's actual glasses half full. It was a good thing. But as I say under there, that the challenge of getting the data that we want for all the leagues that we want it for is pulling stuff from different websites where you get duplicate player IDs and so on and so forth. So like I say, it's not surprising that there's something went weird at some point in time. So things to note then before we go any further, these are just little details, but I know that the Roses audience will want to know them. So when we're thinking about a player's career, we're only thinking about them being involved in a match. So actually the question that we had earlier about if you're off a long time from injury, we wouldn't see that in this data because yeah, there wouldn't be like a flat line when you're out for injury at this point in time, right? So we hope to do this in the future, but right now you wouldn't. You'd just see when they came back and what happened when they came back. Okay, so that's an important thing to note. The idea is that the player LO ratings, when you'll see some examples in a moment, they all start at the same number. Again, in that Roses talk, James discussed you could think of different starting values. But in a moment, you'll see why I felt that starting everybody at the same point made sense for the things that we're going to do in a moment. So that's where they start, because when you're doing those team LO ratings, you start at 1,000 and then, like we say, start updating it based on the results. So it makes sense for the player version to start at 1,000 divided by 11 players in a team. And then also for this analysis, because just to make our life a bit easier, and also just because we thought, we want to get interesting people. So we were only going to look at people who've actually played more than 0 minutes, so did get on a pitch, because they can imagine what their rating looks like. And as I say, just because we wanted to sort of keep it to perhaps people with interesting careers, I say, I'm imagining I'm just working with a young footballer, 100 games. That's what we might target, somebody who gets to 100 games, including being on the bench. So that leaves us with about 7,000 players that we're going to look at. And like I said, here we go. So from now on, there's just a lot of me just putting pictures up because I thought if I was at Roses, I'd just want to sit and have a look at some of these graphs. So I'll just waffle on giving you white noise where you go and have a look at. These are just players that I thought might have interesting LO rating plots so that we can see whether these look like we would expect them. So I've chosen Joe Garner, who's an Oldham player. You've got to have one in there in a Roses talk. And we'll come back to Joe Garner later as well. So Joe Garner has got one of those careers that we were talking about earlier, like over 600 games. And this is in 2023, right? So even more now. What you're seeing is the background shows the league that club was in at the time, the background colour. And then the colour of the plot is the team that they are playing for. Now, they're not, because I'm not going to take credit for this. Rich Bingham is also here, produced these plots for me. And yeah, in an amount of time that was so impressive to me, I couldn't believe it. But to make the teams actually be like the colours that we want the teams to be, I know is an absolute nightmare in R. So you've got them in a rainbow with alphabetical order. But it gives you, you get the picture. So we've got Joe Garner there with the nice long career. We've got Jack Grealish, who I thought was an interesting point because, playing with Aston Villa for a long time at different levels. What did that do to the player rating? Then goes to Man City. Then maybe it's not playing as much. We can all think about what happened to Jack Grealish. Underneath Jack Grealish, I've got Calvin Phillips. Similar with one club. For a long time, Leeds United, going through leagues with Leeds United and then going to Man City and then deciding whether or not you can all decide for yourselves whether that was a clever move by Calvin Phillips. Obviously, I've got skin in the game. James Milner. So this depresses me. So James Milner, I always think of as a Leeds player, but you can barely see the blue at the start of James Milner's career. And the most common team is actually Liverpool. So yeah, like I say, it's 23, so he's still at Liverpool in our world today. And then we've got Jamie Vardy and Harry Kane, because again, Harry Kane's got that history of playing down the leagues. Okay, so hopefully you're looking at these things and thinking, yeah, I've heard of these players. That is kind of what I would expect their careers to look like. The reason we wanted to see, why we've put that background in about, say, Jack Grealish at the top there, he's playing for Aston Villa as they're getting promoted and relegated. So when they get relegated, you would expect to see Jack Grealish not getting a great rating, and then when they're getting promoted, it doing better. But yeah, you can decide amongst yourselves how much you think the player rating should be robust to these external factors, because Jack Grealish, if we're thinking of it as a rating of, how good a footballer he is, it's not dramatically, massively going up and down over these years. A question. Yeah, has someone got their hand up?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yeah.
Oh, sorry. So yeah, it was just a first impression. Looking at these graphs, they seem to be rewarding being in a good team, perhaps much more than the player themselves. So yeah, was James Milner really that much better when he was playing for Liverpool than he was earlier on in his career? I'm not sure. He's been a reliable performer all the way through his career, but I would have thought, he's an example of somebody, at least in my mind, who would be, fairly consistent and constant. But what's driving the upward trend there is Liverpool. He was playing for a much, much better team. Yeah. He also played for us, Newcastle. So yeah, I can say that. Does this really capture the individual's contribution to the team's performance then? If these players are, their ratings are moving so much with the teams, or is that just unfair that actually if you look at all the players, it's not just about the teams, it's there are individual attributes in there as well that
no, I completely agree. And again, great question, because you'll see later on that, when I said that we're sort of treating it like an input, that is in James Reade has provided us with these player ratings, and we're just gonna that's a question for another day. We're gonna see if we can say that these are good and then work with them. But you're absolutely right, and you'll see later, when I said actually doing this kind of analysis can kind of give a sense check about how good the actual input rating system is. You'll see later on that it picks out players from Celtic as being like absolute superstars, and that I completely agree with you. Okay. It's picking up that they're just bossing every week, So I think it does, and it's made us have conversations about let's go back to the drawing board, maybe, in some cases, and think about how we can calibrate that. So no, that's exactly what I wanted. That's exactly what we were thinking, and that's why we produced these plots, because we wanted to see, kind of like you say, how. Yes, go on, James. I don't know why I'm talking now. It should definitely be you.
You're talking because you're the expert here, Jess. That's why. But just to say, Ian, that's a really valid point, and we have a lot of discussions about the extent to which a player, in any circumstance, a player's rating moves differently from the team that they're playing with, and how the team's rating is moving. And what I was going to say was that I think, especially with the Celtic point, is that is also a criticism. It can be a criticism of the ELO ratings themselves as well. So what I found when I've been doing ELO ratings is that I often use Celtic as a kind of a sense check for how good they look. Because if you say just use a very basic rating system, the same adjustment factor for all types of games and so on, Celtic come out looking fantastic because the Celtic games back to 1870 something or other, whereas I've often only got Barcelona games since the 1990s, and so you find that Celtic are somehow far better than Celtic because they played more games. And there are ways in which you can tweak the way in which you calculate the ratings. You can upweight cup matches. You can add a kind of an increased adjustment for the start of the season to account for recruitment, things like that. And similarly, you can do the same thing for the player versions, I think. But suffice to say, basically, it's a very, very, very important point that you've made. So thank you.
So I was just wondering, maybe one of the adjustments might be for the quality of the other players in the side. So again, with James Milner at Liverpool, he's got Mo Salah and potentially making him look rather good. So yeah, I don't know if that can be built in or not, some weighting for the quality, for the ELO ratings of the other players in your team, or the other players in your team close to your position. I don't know.
Yeah, again, I think there's something interesting there, because if you move to a different team, obviously you're then playing with a different set of players, and that makes you different, effective in a different way. We've been thinking a little bit about what happens when you move to a different team in a different division. Would we expect your rating to increase? So yeah, exactly that. Stefan, I'm jumping on your talk now. Yes.
No, it's our talk. It's our talk.
Don't know if you're trying to talk, Stefan, but you're on mute.
I'm sure this is gold that we're completely missing now.
Exactly, it's a crucial point, but we're not getting it. So.
Yeah.
I'm probably responsible, actually, because I muted him right at the start because he was not muted. A couple of people weren't on mute.
So maybe he can't unmute himself.
So I might be responsible for the fact that we can't hear Stefan.
Or should we press on and we could ask it? We can return to it at the end if we don't address it anyway. Yeah. Right. Okay. So let's crack on.
No, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm really, really sorry. Sorry, I just got confused by my own computer screen. So, so I'm sorry, but I the only reason I wanted to jump in was because isn't the answer to this question about how to distribute the value amongst the team the concept of the Shapley value? I've never calculated Shapley values myself, so I'm never quite sure how it works. But isn't that the concept that you want, that somehow it's a mechanism for allocating value?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I was saying, linked to this, we were talking the other day about this stuff, and I was saying about maybe we need to factor in competitive balance in the leagues because of the Celtic problem. And they're sort of linked ideas, are they not? But again, I'm looking at James Reade momentarily unmuted, and so yeah, I think this is. I'll pass it to you as an economics style question.
Oh no, all I was going to say was that sounds like a fantastic point.
Yeah.
I don't remember much about Shapley values from doing my masters many years ago, so I need to do a bit of research back into them.
Yeah, no, I feel the same, but I feel like this is possibly the answer. Anyway.
Excellent. But yeah, so like I say, what I think is great about this is kind of when I say to you, I'm telling you the story about how it's kind of, in the first instance, we were going to just treat this separately, as in this is an input that we're using, the player rating system. And like we say, it's another question for another day and another Roses talk, and we can talk a long time about how we might develop a player rating system. But so we're just going to, for now, say that, okay, James Reade solved it and we've got a fantastic player rating system that we can use as an input. But like I say, I think that what shows the strength of the analysis we'll look at today is that it does pick up these things. So like I say, we have had these good conversations because it's kind of identifying Celtic as being really good. So yeah, anyway, it's all connected and it's all really interesting. But here we go. So we've got our player rating system then. We want to cluster them. We want to find the different types of careers. But like we've said, you've got Joe Garner there with the 600 games, and you've got Calvin Phillips with 300. How are we going to compare these two people? So this is how we do it. So here you go, the moment you've all been waiting for. It's inspired by a paper that one of my heroes wrote. It's got a great name called Selfie, for cell phenotyping. And they were in turn inspired by like walking profiles or, like Strava routes. So they had the same problem. They were trying to cluster and do things with time series that had different lengths. They were they were looking at cells. Actually, it was videos. So like XY coordinates of these cells, and they'd go off the edge of the shot and come back in again. And they had all these issues. So they thought about how can we make this into something that we can work with. So what they did wasn't what we saw before with the dynamic time warping. It isn't trying to map everybody onto the same thing. It's just going to do, like we say, what Strava would do, what a walking guide would do, and try and describe, a route through other measures, so other metrics that can try and capture features about it that's informative to you. So they've got standard statistical measures like your mean, your standard deviation, your skewness. So they're going to summarize you can use those to summarize time series of varying length, but they might not, just that alone isn't going to represent all those things we've talked about before, like the player coming off an injury or whatever. So you want to try and capture those ups and downs in the career. And so they looked at those elevation profiles in walking guides and thought about total ascent, total descent, the biggest jump that you might have between, two steps, and so on and so forth. And so, as I say, this is one of my favorite papers ever. I think it's absolute genius. And so this is why this was in my orbit. And then I went to the Roses talk and saw the time series of different lengths. And I was like, you could totally use these ideas here. So that's basically a long way of telling you how we got to this point. Now, again, something that I really don't want to go off into a detour with is to get those ideas about that total ascent and descent and things. They use something called a Haar-wavelet transform that basically, like I say, it's something that helps us get these like steps, these jumps, these differences between two successive observations. But what it also does is, as it says there, is that you can get this at kind of different time frames. So I talked about kind of the biggest step between, if I'm on a walk, like the biggest step I'd have to take. But then kind of looking at that picture there, taking back, if you can kind of look at it about kind of over what about every two steps and so on and so forth. Basically like different frequency information. So you're looking at differences of differences and so on and so forth. As I say, I don't want to go too far into that, but the idea basically was they wanted to do these things from walking guides, and they thought about this Haar-wavelet transform that's a nice thing from maths that they could use that would give it that sort of information, and has lots of nice R packages that you can use to calculate them for you. So here we go. These are the 30 things. This is a horrible table, but these are the 30 things that we've calculated for each of those time series. So this is how you get it to be something that you can, stick into an Excel spreadsheet and work with. So like we say, we've got mean standard deviation of the time series. We've got these total ascent and descent things. We've also looked at the average standard deviation, so on and so forth. And then extra little thing. Oh, there's two parts of this that I haven't really spoken about yet. So we also added in, just as extra things we could say about someone's career, the total games they've had, including on the bench, the total minutes that they've had in their career, and then their average minutes per game by dividing one by the other. So they're extra things that we can put in our model. And then finally, one that we've again stolen from Selfie is the trajectory area of the rectangle that encloses the time series. So what they're saying is, if you've got if you draw a rectangle around the time series, the bigger that is would be giving you information about that time series. And then if you think about, if it's a rectangle, if you do the height divided by the length, again, you'll get information about a career, because this is a long career that's quite stable, as opposed to, like we saw, James Milner shooting up because you've gone to Liverpool. So that kind of ratio between the height and the width could be interesting as well. Right, so now we've got our 30 things that we've calculated to describe our time series that we can then use to start finding groups of players, types of career. So we said we were going to do principal components analysis. So here it is. This is the, so we've done the principal components analysis. Like I say, we've thrown those 30 things into a principal components analysis. So we're doing linear combinations of the original variables to get new metrics that are linear combinations, and then we can plot them to have a look at the data. These are just, every blob here is a player, and the colour is the league that they have done the majority of those appearances for. So this is why we can see, well, if I show you the next one, this has got, it'll do it for me, names on. So we can see those dark blue Scottish Premier League, these are our Celtic players that are creeping up at the top right of the plot. In the dark red, we can see our Premier League stalwarts. And then, like I said, I've put up the screenshot from James Reade's talk, because, like I said, D. Lewington out and away there as a standout name away from the pack. And so it was really interesting to me that you'd, all this time before, picked out Dean Lewington as an interesting example, because clearly Dean Lewington is. So again, I'm just doing one of those where I think I've had a lot of fun just looking at this and trying to spot players that I recognise. So I'll just give you a moment while I just, be a bit of white noise so you can have a little look. And then we'll pick out some of these players and have a look at those ELO ratings time series to see what they look like. So who have we got? Kyle Walker, Ronaldo, Wayne Rooney. We saw these sort of look, Kyle Walker, Ronaldo, Wayne Rooney. So we can see these three in the top right. So Ronaldo is the highest of those three names, and Rooney is the furthest right. So if we look at their time series, Ronaldo being the highest in terms of this direction, and then Wayne Rooney being the furthest to the right, we can see again is one of these players with over 600 appearances. If we look, I'll just flick back again so we can see it. We've got two names at the bottom here, D. Ure and G. McLaren, who have played in the Scottish League Two the majority of their career, and they're on the left. So we can see straight away these green plots here. They've got like the opposite shape of those on the top row, but then, like we saw before, so we're hinting at this a little bit before, but I think it's clearer here. So G. McLaren is left of D. Ure, and G. McLaren has got like 100 games, whereas this D. Ure has got over 300 games. So what it seems then is that when we're just looking at that plot, the good players are at the top of it, and the long careers are at the right of it. So if you're top right, you're a good player with a long career. And then, like we say, we've got everybody's favourite there, Dean Lewington, in the bottom right, just to show you. So that should look exactly like James Reade was showing in that talk that we just saw on the previous slide. Okay, so that's giving us an idea of perhaps what these what the principal components analysis might be showing us, that there's some kind of, you know, information in career length and quality. And just thought it'd be interesting to have, if we've got player quality, just have a little look at this score 2 here for the different players. So we've got, like we say, we can see that score 2, so how high you are. Things that are important are like your average LO rating, your max, your min, and so on. And then, like I say, down at the bottom here, it's like how much are you descending? You know, lots of descending things in your time series is putting you towards the bottom right. And then we can see, maybe you can't see too well because I don't like this plot, but I didn't have time to make it look nicer for you. You can see things like minutes played are pulling you towards the right. So again, like what we could see with our eyes is showing up in the data. And on the left, that shows you like a heat map of the weights of those original variables for the principal components. So we're looking at the bottom, very bottom row and the second row are showing you which things are important for that. And like I say, you can see big weights, so dark purple for like Playman's career for PC1. Okay, so like we said then, it feels like this direction, the score 2, the vertical direction, seems to be like a measure of quality. So I've just done a quick box plot, just because I thought it would be fun, of that that principal component 2, that score for principal component 2, and then we've just divided it up by, like we said, that league that you've played the most in. So as we saw, every single player we've looked at, I think, hasn't just played in one league their whole career. So that's the point. There is overlap between these things because players are moving between them and clubs are moving between them. But where did they spend the majority of the career? And then what does that score 2 look like? And we can see that we've got the Premier League on the left there being a bit higher and then a drop down to the Championship. We see overlaps with League 1, League 2, National League. And then, yeah, so that's why I said this quote's going to be important later, because I thought that was interesting. It kind of did totally back up what they were saying about the big jump between the top clubs. And then actually these things are a bit lower. There's not that much of a step change. Just a quick note on these here, where their most common league is the Champions League or the Europa League. So this is where you find, if we go back to the plot, we have got people like Messi and so on in the data set because we've got Champions League games in there. Like we were saying before, we want to get these cup games in because that's where you get the information about the kind of cross-league comparisons that you can do. So that's why they turn up as right at the top of the plot, because we're only ever seeing them in the Champions League. And then, like I say, towards the middle, because it's not all of their appearances, it's just the ones we've seen in the Champions League. So again, it makes sense that they are where they are, and it's unreal that they've got so high. Like having 100 games in the Champions League's amazing. So yeah. Right, but the point of this was we wanted to do some cluster analysis. So we wanted to put this into groups. So we start off with our k-means cluster analysis. So let's have a look. Okay, that's what it does. So like you said, you've got to, for k-means, you've got to tell it how many groups you want it to be put into. It's the same for the other analysis that we'll do. So there are various methods out there that can help you make that decision. It wasn't overwhelmingly any single number, but yeah, a couple of methods pointed to 10, and I thought that was a nice number. And you can sort of see what's happening. Now, there's no reason for this to look like this, right? So now we've got their points coloured by the cluster that they've gone into. We shouldn't, that's why I showed you that one before, because I would have expected us to see a bit more overlap, because we are actually using as the basis for this cluster analysis, we're using 16 principal components, because that gives us 99% of the information in our data set. So that's why you do see like overlaps. It's not just looking at these two coordinates, there's other things, but we're just visualizing it with these two coordinates. But that's what it's turned it into, and I think we can see it's kind of what we were seeing already. You've got the two things that we're looking at, long careers and then quality of career, and then you're just sort of getting into a zone, appropriate zone. So we can have a look at, because this is k-means analysis, we can see the players who are closest to the center of these 10 clusters. Now I've done two things because I think both of these are interesting. So, for example, the player that's coming up as absolutely in the middle of the dark red cluster, where Wayne Rooney was, is L. Lawrence of Mansfield. So again, this is the club that they spent most of their time at. Anyway, so you can see the point of those people at MathSpot when they were like, when we were saying who it was representing the particular cluster, they were just like, who? What is it about that cluster that means that it's different to the one next to it? So I've plotted all these things on the same axis because just so that you can compare and contrast. You'll see in a moment, we can also look at them in a sort of zoomed in version, and then you can see differences. But it's worth noting that, if you, the one on the left is getting to much higher values, which when you put them, just as a nicer plot, you kind of lose that. There's actually, much higher values in different clusters. But what do we see then? So like we're saying, dark red, long career, over 500 appearances, it's going up a lot. Then orange is a similar sort of length, but it's not going up as much, and so on and so forth. I think you can have a look at those yourself. But so generally we're seeing what we said before, this differentiation between good careers and like successful careers and long careers. And then again, if you zoom in, you can see these sort of subtle differences in the shape as well. Okay, now let's look at the archetype analysis. So same idea, you need to tell it how many groups you want it to put the data into, and then it's going to try and find, instead of the means and Joe average, it's going to try and find the kind of exceptional person. This one wanted 17 clusters, so it's quite hard to visualize. And you can see in the middle, because like I said to you before, we're using 16 things and we're just visualizing it in these 2 dimensions. So there's a lot of blur in the middle. But we're seeing similar things to what we saw before. But if I show you it like this, I think it's a bit nicer. You can see the differences between these clusters. And like I say, in general, now we've got 17, we are going to get that more finesse. So you do see that these clusters are kind of, well, when you look at it for this level, we're getting long, and are you wiggling around the kind of starting value? Are you going up? Are you going down? They're sort of the 3 categories. And then how long is the career? But then within ones that kind of look similar, like for example, if you look in the top square, those 3 down the middle look quite similar, but like we say, different lengths of career. But then if you zoom in and look what's happening, you can see there's kind of different behavior between, say, cluster 2, which goes up and then goes down, as opposed to cluster, what's that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 underneath it that goes down and then goes up again. Like we say, probably that person, as we were just saying before, maybe had a transfer to a different team. But these are so, because we're so zoomed in, it's not, like we say, the jumps that these players are having. Okay, I'll move on and ask you, let's return to our Oldham player, because right at the start we said this could be useful to a team, and you might want to recruit someone. So I picked Joe Garner, who's a current Oldham player, but was not an Oldham player at this point in time. I don't believe, in 2023, 1st of May 2023. So I'm not going to go for audience participation, but have a think where you feel that Joe Garner should appear on this plot on the left, and then, of course, which of these clusters is Joe Garner going to end up in? Okay, and then I'll let you, as I say, I'm not going for audience participation. I'll let you think about it, and then I'll show you. that we can see Joe Garner is a black blob here. Okay, so sort of in the middle right. Very close to that A Bishop, who's the centre of the K-means purple cluster. And yep, in that D Lewington cluster, the long, stalwart. And I think that's right. That does feel like the category that Joe Garner is in. So yeah, like we say, in this purpley one and the orange one, that's Joe Garner's kind of there. So conclusions then, I'm just going to go straight to those aims that we tried to do. So hopefully you agree that we've presented a way that you can categorize career paths, and we've seen an example of Joe Garner where, yeah, it does sort of feel like it is putting players together that do feel like they've had similar careers. Like we say, you can interpret the career paths. They seem to be, as a broad strokes, the length of your career and the quality of your career, which I would argue are really the two main things about a player's career. But then within that, you can go and see, kind of drill down into that quality, kind of how is that behaviour evolving. And like we say, this was sort of a final little bit that wasn't really my, in my head, that would be a possibility, because I was just thinking we were taking these things as an input that we had no, way of saying, oh, this rating system, you could do it like this. By doing all this, it's actually helped us develop the ratings model, because like we say, it's a massive challenge putting together all those data sets, and you can it starts to pick out kind of ones where there's an error. And like we say, as somebody brilliantly asked earlier on, you can straight away see the Celtic problem, that it seems to be overrating people who've played for Celtic. And so just for the future then, the idea is that we actually want to use this. So it's trying to get it to a place where it could be used for recruitment or career development with your young footballer. So in terms of the yellow player ratings, like we say, we're refining those parameterizations and those methods, and we've had lots of great suggestions today. So that's exactly why we wanted to do this Roses talk, so that we'd get those good suggestions. But then this is really the first, like I said at the start, this really is the first step for the cluster analysis, because you want to start looking at, like, okay, we love Joe Garner, who are the nearest neighbours of Joe Garner? Let's get a player in like that. And then obviously going forward, once you have your categories, then can you start predicting which category someone's going to end up in, but not from seeing the whole time series, from just seeing the start of the career, and then how small can you make that N? And then, like I say, the perspective of the player trying to make it would be going, right, so let's look at the people who end up in the sort of career that I want. Does that inform my decision making? Like, should I take up this opportunity? Should I move because geography seems to be crucial, etc., etc. So hopefully it would actually be useful to those two groups of people. And yeah, we'll leave it there and have some questions. So as I say, I love that we already sort of had this question early on in the talk, which like I say, shows just how good a question it was.
Thank you, Jess. I'm going to give you a team's round of applause.
Oh, thank you very much.
There you go. We've got time for more questions and comments.
I'll stop sharing for the moment.
Stefan.
Managing to work the technology this time. So, so a couple of things, I think. Sorry. So one empirical thing is, I wonder to what extent it matters that your network is not the entire network of football, right? So you've got people coming in and out of this system. You've thought about this, so I expect you've got an answer to that question. So I'll let you give me that. But then I think more fundamentally, I think this is a really interesting question. I've always believed that football players are essentially fungible, meaning that you take one player from Team X and move into Team Y, and you get you get their skills, and the team is increased in proportion to the skill of that player, and you can mix and match any group of players you like. It really doesn't matter. And my evidence for that has always been the transfer market. If there were any real synergy between players, if player X and player Y were better together than apart, they'd sell themselves together. They would be traded together. They'd be more valuable to the clubs together. And we, as far as I know, we never ever see that. There's never any multiple trades where players go together. And so which it always suggests to me they're fungible. However, that said, I think the vast majority of sports economists do not believe that. I think they believe that actually there's such a thing as team synergy and group cohesion and stuff like that, and that matters. And there are a bunch of papers on precisely this issue, right? So it's clear that people actually, I'm very much in a minority of believing it. It strikes me that your approach, I think you have to decide in what you're doing is where are you going to land on this? You could have stopped my extreme approach and say, no, they're all fully fungible and I don't agree with anything about synergy effects, in which case you're fine as you are, because it seems to me that's your working hypothesis here, right? That they are just fungible. But if you want to take the synergy into account, you need to find some way to incorporate that into your analysis. And I don't know, there probably the Shapley value might be a way to which you could think about it, but there might be other ways that you could do that as well, which somehow allocating, you're already waiting for the goals scored or minutes on the pitch and stuff like that, but there might be more stuff than that, something about your history as a player that actually feeds into determining your synergy value or whatever it might be. So those are my two thoughts.
Yes, we've considered both of them, I think, in our conversations in the past. Literally the other day we were saying, yeah, we just need every single player in the world for every match that they've done. But like I say, so it really is, I've really presented my corner of the project, and yeah, like I say, getting this, I have got no idea how they James and Rich hand me these time series, and I've got no idea how they get that from Transfermarkt or whatever footballdata.co.uk into my hands, calculate all this stuff. And yeah,
he's making it up, he's just making it up as he goes along.
Well, they're both in on it together then. But yeah, so that's the ideal. You want to get more and more and more and more in, but it's I think I do agree with you a bit that it's just you put X in Y, and I really think that is an interesting point about selling them together and as a group, and that's really interesting. So I'll say something and then I'll see if Rich or James want to come in, but I had thought about the net sort of the synergy and things like that, and I've got one of my PhD students is working on that sort of idea, so trying to have a bit of a network or kind of working out who's playing with who and trying to feed that in, but it's not a it's not a trivial problem.
No, it's a really
it's a really interesting one.
Yeah, and if you do take the fungibility point of view, you want to say that you're deviating from what almost everybody else thinks. that's I know, which I think makes it interesting. I mean, either way you go, I think it's fine. But I think it's an interesting point to consider.
So I think one of the things about that kind of team, some of the parts, does it exceed it or not as much as of it? I think one way in which we might be able to at least get some light on that is that you can, of course, calculate these ELO ratings, as we have done here, where we sum up the starting 11 and that's the team's ELO rating, and then you adjust based on that, or you simply calculate the ELO rating for the team throughout, and then you can look at, in my mind, you could look at the difference between those two. If a particular team is more than the sum of their parts, the ELO rating that just uses the team name rather than the sum of the parts ought to, I guess, increase by more than more than the sum of the parts, perhaps. But that's just a thought that I've had in terms of that whole, team as a unit versus team sum of the parts. Then on players that move together, Tevez and Mascherano when they moved to West Ham many, many years ago.
And that was a crooked deal, right? They had to. That was illegal, right? Yeah. So yeah. Of course, never say never, right? I mean, it does happen, but you've got to admit it's a pretty rare thing.
It is.
I think, but the counter argument is this, or is this, that if you look at the teams that are successful teams have very low turnover of players. They have very stable squads. And the question is, is it the fact of the stability that's helping? Because another thing to say is, what you have no role for the manager in this. The manager's contribution is precisely nil.
That's
right. Which again is something that I've often said in the past, but again gets you a lot of criticism from other people who say no, the managers really matter. So that I think that's interesting. But the thing that's always struck me about this kind of level of data that you've got, match level data, something I've always wanted to look at is as you go from game to game, there's an enormous amount of turnover on the players on the pitch. So it's very rare for the same team to go onto the field twice, as in 2 games in a row, right? And that turnover in itself, I don't think anybody's ever really analysed that turnover, and I think that's really interesting. Does it matter? It ought to matter, right?
That's what I think. That when I said that we have as an input a player rating system, and the other option could have been a plus minus. I think that's more where that I call it the Ian McHale paper, even though he's not the first author on it, but that kind of plus minus ratings for football, and that's the whole point it makes in that paper is this is difficult because you don't have kind of the perfect experiment where you can see this play without everybody and then this player and then run it a few times, unlike say basketball where plus minus ratings sort of came from, where it's rolling subs and you can see different combinations. So I think that kind of idea, if we went the other way and started thinking in a plus minus way, we'd maybe sort of capture that. But it's, like Ian McHale said, it's hard to do because you just don't have the data.
Well, it's really interesting anyway. So thank you. It's cool.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stefan. More questions and comments? Got a few minutes left. It's resounding silence. So unless someone wants to leap in at the last moment.
Rich.
Oh, Rich, go on.
So it's a quick comment response to the last thing, actually, really, that like in football's defined by rare events. So it's defined by these rare events that are goals. So assigning the contribution to the rare events that define the game, that define the result of the game. The ELO can only do this, only record from the result and from the score difference, I guess. But something like basketball, where it happens a lot, scoring happens a lot. Jess will know I've heard me talk about basketball too often. Where scoring happens a lot, perhaps the synergy is less in something like that compared to in football, where Ian mentioned about Salah playing on this team with Milner. There's probably a flip side to that that did raise Milner's rating, I would have thought, but also Salah has scored a lot of the goals, so I would presume his rating goes up a lot more in those games, because the ELO does take that into account. But playing for Liverpool certainly would have helped Milner's overall rating in people's estimation of it. I don't know about the objectiveness of that, but I would have thought that plays a role. So scattered comments, but comments nonetheless.
No, I think that about so again, this is something that we've talked about before, but Semenyo, I've just seen on my phone today, has got player of the month or something. Was a good player, but then you put him with even better, surround them with even better players, they'll do even better. So it's, yeah, you are a function of the team you play in, certainly.
But then, how then do you factor that into the?
Yeah.
So how much is the contribution of the other players, and how much is it you?
Yeah.
I think that's the difficulty with football. You know, it's hard to say. So, whereas
no, you're solving the problem. You're not presenting the problem.
But there's an extent to it, I guess. I mean, we're solving it by selection, right? Because these players are being selected by the manager, who isn't in our model. Because to some extent, the players, to a large extent, the players that stick around the longest are the players that play the most, are the most consistent players, and they're being selected and they're available to be selected. And a lot of the time when I'm having these kinds of discussions with folk, it really does boil down to that really simple metric of what proportion of games are you playing. And so to some extent, the ELO ratings really just capture that, and therefore the extent to which a player can track a good team's ELO rating as that progresses. Daniele's got a comment.
Yeah, just on this last point, you also have examples that go in the opposite direction. So I think you had a graph earlier with, Jack Grealish, and I was about to comment that, his rating seems to really increase dramatically when he joins Manchester City, even though most people would say, well, you know what, he was a better player when he was at Aston Villa. So maybe there are synergies and complementarities, contra to what, Stefan thinks.
No, I'm definitely in a minority here. The clear majority thinks there are synergies and benefits. It's identifying them that's the problem, right?
Absolutely.
They're very hard. I mean, the literature really struggles to actually come up with any quantitative evidence that they're the stuff that I've looked at. But it's certainly an economist very strongly held belief amongst economists.
But yeah, Stefan, I mean, if you fielded a team of 11 forwards, right, that would do less well than a team with a goalkeeper, 4 defenders, 4 midfielders, and 2 forwards, right?
Oh yeah, no. I mean, obviously but that's not quite a fair comparison. I'm saying if you chose 11 players, all of whom fitted the standard position,
with the system,
one goalkeeper, one striker, or whatever, then that team would be as good as any other of equivalent value. And that's what that's the. I mean, I think that's the Transfermarkt studies all really come up with that proposition that really the sum of the player values is what determines the outcome of the game. And I think whether with the ELO analysis, whether that would confirm or refute that, I think that would be interesting.
I think that the point about the manager, that we're just forgetting the manager, is so interesting. Because like tracking a manager moving between teams, and like we were saying before about the sum of the parts, like the manager playing these teams, I think that would be really interesting. And we were having a talk about this before. I think it might have been certainly someone in this Teams call giving a presentation about the biases that managers hold, and that all we can use here is the people that actually got on the pitch and played, but there's reasons why there's people might not get there, so that's all we've got. And so that's not I think the manager, the fact that we're ignoring the manager is, we need to think about that. We need to think about the manager. That's really interesting.
Well, when you watch football casually, it seems pretty clear that the players are ignoring the manager as well, right? So,
yeah.
It's like the difference between the US and football, right, is that in the US you have the GM who's selecting the players, and so in some sense you're not ignoring the managers because you're identifying selection, but you're just ignoring the idea that they have any coaching ability, which might be right. I mean, that's it's an interesting question.
Well, on that point, thank you very much, everyone. We've reached bang on 4 o'clock. So thank you, Jess, for a really interesting presentation. Thank you, everyone, for comments and questions. we will stop there and we'll return next week. Next week, we've got Joska Flints presenting When Fans Travel, Determinants and Effects of Away Support in Football. So have a great weekend, everyone, and look forward to seeing you all again next week. I'm going to stop the recording.
I was going to say, do I leave? Or do we have a debrief?